Support for NPR comes from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people, and the ECMC Foundation, working to improve post-secondary educational outcomes for underserved students through evidence-based innovation. Learn more at ecmcfoundation.org.
Xin chào. As a 15-year-old refugee from Vietnam, I knew that education was the key to finding opportunities in my new home. When having children of my own, I became an advocate to improve the public education system that gave me a chance to contribute to our America. Democrats invest in education because we are committed to fighting for all kids. Washington cast 43 votes to Senator Bernie Sanders and 66 votes to our next president, Joe Biden.
That was Washington State Representative My Linh Tai casting our state's Democratic votes for Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders at the virtual Democratic National Convention. That's the first topic for Week in Review. Our guest this week, State Senator Mona Das, former chair of the state GOP, Chris Vance, and C.R. Douglas, political reporter for Q13. By the way, you can watch us at facebook.com/KUOW Public Radio or at youtube.com/user/KUOW 94.9. And I got my good shirt on, so you're not going to want to miss that. First of all, let's get your general impressions of the show that Democrats put on this week. Mona Das, what did you think of the first virtual national convention?
Hi, everybody. So great to be here. Thank you so much for having me. I thought it was incredible. I had very different expectations this year, and I thought the virtual, the way they handled the virtual piece really well. Great shout out to Representative My Linh Tai, who did such an amazing job representing Washington. I really thought the roll call, I know that's what so many people are talking about, was so special to see. You know, so many of us have been trapped at home, and so to be able to see America and each region and what makes it special and different and the people it represents was just really an incredible thing to watch. And I really was very excited about the whole conference, actually, the whole convention.
I've got some clips to play from Joe Biden and Barack Obama. But first of all, C.R. Douglas, your kind of first impressions of what we saw over the past few evenings.
Well, I actually didn't love the virtual format. I think you lose a lot in that. You had to do it, and they made the best of it. But conventions, I think, really work when you've got the energy of a crowd in the room. I mean, the back and forth of that is so important. And it's not just that, you know, you got 10 or 20,000 people in the arena, but conventions represent the culmination of this months-long, amazing American display of democracy, where we start with Iowa and each state votes, and there's a big debate, and you go on to the next one, the next one, the next one, and then each state is electing delegates that will go to the convention. I mean, it's this huge buildup where the people in the room are so key to the process because they were elected as delegates, and it just, you lost all that. I mean, there were some benefits, and I do think the roll call really worked nicely, but on balance, I just don't think it's a great format.
Chris Vance, former Republican Party chair, although I guess I should call you an apostate Republican at this point. Is that okay?
Well, I'm an independent. So
independent, former Republican Party chair, but as someone who worked for your party for quite some time, looking critically at the convention, I mean, generally it was getting good reviews from places that I looked. Maybe I wasn't looking in the right places. What was your impression? Did the Democrats come out of this doing what they needed to do with their virtual national convention?
Absolutely. And so I'm an independent, but I'm a never Trump, pro-Biden. I'm a senior advisor to the Lincoln Project. I spend a big part of my day every day trying to elect Joe Biden. So I'm not exactly unbiased, but trying to speak professionally, I thought they made the very best of a bad situation having to do this virtually. I thought the Democrats nailed it. It was a slam dunk. And then two things come out of it. Number one, the Democrats, unlike the Republicans, understand that politics is about addition and multiplication, growing your party, hold your base and reach to the center. And that's what they did. I mean, this convention had something for everyone, from very progressive Democrats like AOC and Bernie Sanders, all the way to people that I really support, like John Kasich and Colin Powell. The Democrats are building a broad governing coalition that includes people who used to vote Republican. And then the final thing is, Joe Biden was fantastic last night. He eviscerated the argument that there's something wrong with him. He's senile. There's cognitive problems. Good luck making that case, Republicans, because Biden just crushed that last night.
It's the Week in Review on KUOW. Russell Berman in The Atlantic talked about Obama's convention speech, and he wrote, "A man elected a dozen years ago on a gauzy promise of hope and change found himself instead turning to fear as a rallying cry." Here's some of what the ex-president said.
For close to 4 years now, he has shown no interest in putting in the work, no interest in finding common ground, no interest in using the awesome power of his office to help anyone but himself and his friends. No interest in treating the presidency as anything but one more reality show that he can use to get the attention he craves. Donald Trump hasn't grown into the job because he can't.
Former President Obama was really portraying this election in existential terms, and he's known for generally being more upbeat. And it just kind of actually, in some ways, reminded me of the tone that Donald Trump took 4 years ago. Things are terrible, and we have to change things in an existential fashion to move forward. Was it striking to any of you that Obama took this kind of approach in his speech?
Yes, and I'm glad you talked about fear, because we should be afraid. This is not a normal election between a Republican and a Democrat. This is an election between a sane, normal, mainstream American leader and a wannabe Duce autocrat who wants to bring authoritarianism to the United States. I'm not kidding. I do not believe that American democracy will survive a second term of Donald Trump. We are on the same road as that Orban has taken Hungary, that is happening in Poland, and of course, his hero, Vladimir Putin. I mean, Trump has consistently shredded the Constitution, puts himself above the law, and I'm in that category of people that really thinks this is the most dangerous moment America has faced since 1864. And I wish Obama had gone even farther. Donald Trump must be defeated for America to survive.
I was not surprised by his tone, because it was really the tone that almost all the speakers were striking. I mean, they were kind of anti-Trump from the minute the whole thing started. And that's different really than 4 years ago. I mean, 4 years ago, they were kind of divided on how much they should use Trump and his personality and just this whole style as a campaign issue, or did you need to kind of prop up the Democrats and the agenda and Hillary Clinton? I mean, there was kind of a divide on that strategy. This year, there isn't. I mean, this year, Democrats certainly feel like, after 4 years of him being in office, I mean, 4 years ago, it was just Trump presidency was just an idea. Now for them, it's a reality, and there's all kinds of kind of baked in views that the public has of his style and the kind of controversial ways about him. And so I think they feel like they're going all in on making this an election about the character of the current president.
Let's turn to Joe Biden's acceptance speech.
Good evening. Ella Baker, a giant of the civil rights movement, left us with this wisdom: give people light, and they will find the way. Give people light. Those are words for our time. The current president has cloaked American darkness for much too long. Too much anger, too much fear, too much division. Here and now, I give you my word. If you entrust me with the presidency, I will draw on the best of us, not the worst. I'll be an ally of the light, not the darkness.
Mona, pretty stark statement there. I am with the light. We don't want to go into the darkness. That speech worked for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the whole tone of the convention that I felt was that the Democrats were showcasing their positive vision for America. And I think with Obama's speech, he was sobering, but he was correct and accurate, that I think we really need to pay attention, and voters do really need to vote and not sit at home this time. So I feel like Obama's speech was like the lecture that we all needed, and Biden's speech was the showcase of hope for America and what our future and new vision can be.
Let's turn to local elections, and I want to ask in a moment about how national politics are affecting or infecting politics here in Washington State. But I want to start with you, Mona Das. What are we seeing coming out of the primary and headed toward the general election when it comes to candidates and issues at the state level? What things stood out for you?
Well, first, I want to just mention that I am speaking today as a Democrat and not as my elected official role, as I want to just make that clear. But I was so excited about the primary. We have an incredible opportunity to elect 9 Black women to the legislature this year, including 2 incredible incumbents, Representative Deborah Morgan, who's my seatmate, and Representative Melanie Morgan. So I'm just really thrilled at a lot of the results. I think there's some of them were really surprising, and I think we've got an opportunity, as we were talking about earlier, to increase our majority in both the House and the Senate this year. And we saw, you know, sweeping Democratic excitement on the statewide party ballots as well. So I think we're in for a great year, and we just need to keep doing the good work and get there in November.
Chris, put your political consultant hat on. How are national politics affecting what we're seeing here in Washington State?
Oh, they affect everything. I mean, all politics now is national. The old saying of all politics is local has not been true for a long time. Our politics have been nationalized, and that is why Republicans are not competitive in Washington State. You know, we Republicans, back when I was one, we weren't fools. I mean, we always nominated people for statewide office who were moderate, from King County, you know, Dino Rossi and Rob McKenna and Slinger, and they still lost because the national message was so toxic. Well, now the national message here is triple toxic, and that's why we're headed towards one-party government in this state. The Republicans had a decent primary in terms of holding on to the seats they have, but they're not going to make any progress towards moving back towards a majority in the legislature. The Republican areas of the state are becoming more Republican, but the urban core is becoming more Democratic. And it is mathematically impossible to elect a governor or U.S. senator if you can't get at least 35, 37% in King County. And you cannot have majorities in the legislature if you don't have a few seats in King County. And the cratering of the Republican Party in King County means that the most interesting thing in Washington State right now is the Democratic Civil War. It's the races where you have one Democrat running against another. Republicans are on the way to becoming irrelevant.
CR, are you equally bearish on Republicans' prospects for the fall here in the state?
I think Chris is right that Republicans are having a tougher and tougher time with these statewide offices. If you look locally, there were some good signs for Republicans, or some bright spots, if you will. Bruce Dammeier, you know, was on his way to re-election, certainly as Pierce County executive, it seems. Jamie Herrera Butler in the 3rd District, U.S. Congressman, she had a very good night, better than she did 4 years ago. So it's not all bad news, but yes, it's hard, especially at the statewide level. I mean, Democrats are ahead in 8 of the 9 statewide offices. The only one they aren't ahead in after the primary is the Secretary of State office. So it's just it's another year where I think you're going to have Democrats, you know, kind of lock out Republicans in a lot of places. I will say something about just kind of history, if you will. We may be on the edge of electing the first ever African American to a congressional seat. That's Marilyn Strickland in the 10th district. There are 2 Democrats running there, so it's, you know, it's one of them. David Hyde, your reporter at KUOW, did a great piece. It's not just that Marilyn Strickland would be the first African American in Washington State as a member of Congress. She would be the first African American in any Northwest state ever elected to Congress. I mean, Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Alaska, I think Wyoming even. I mean, that's pretty astounding that it's been that long.
I've seen that as a toss-up race. Do you think Marilyn Strickland will pull it off?
I do think she has the advantage. Yeah, I think she's, you know, she's a little bit more moderate. I think she's probably going to have more money. I think she's got more name recognition as the former mayor of Tacoma. I would give her the nod, yes.
And that race is really interesting because it's what I'm talking about in terms of the Democratic Civil War, which is a very real thing. I mean, Pramila Jayapal, Bernie Sanders, AOC, they've all endorsed Beth Dolio. And the progressive PAC is spending hundreds of thousands of dollars down there, while more traditional moderates like Gary Locke are endorsing Marilyn Strickland. All across the state, I think the most interesting thing going on is the battle between the left and the far left, between the normal Democrats and the Democratic Socialists. And the 10th, along with the 5th Senate seat race, is an example of that.
Mona Das, I know you don't want to speak in your role as state senator, but as a Democrat, do you agree with Chris that we're seeing this tension already within the Democratic Party?
I do. I definitely think, especially between the folks that were, supporting Bernie and then the folks that were supporting other candidates. I think we see that definitely, like how left are you? How Democratic are you? And I think you're right in showing that that's exactly what's happening in the congressional 10th district. So that's going to be a really interesting race, and I'm definitely keeping my eye on that one too.
The Wall Street Journal had a story, and the headline was something to the effect of "Enjoy your unity now, Democrats, because it will rapidly come to an end." Any predictions from the three of you of when that will happen?
Well, if Joe Biden wins, the moderate wing of the party will have a huge upper hand. They'll control the White House and the Democratic National Committee. But oh my God, if Joe Biden loses, then Donald Trump will have defeated the most moderate Democrat they could have nominated. It will greatly empower the left wing of the Democratic Party. They'll say, "We told you so." So elections matter. And I think the future of the Democratic Party is going to be decided in addition to the future of America.
CR, let's imagine that for a moment, a Trump victory. What would that do to the Democratic Party?
Well, I think Chris is probably right that, the theory of the case here for Democrats is that the right one to have nominated was basically the most moderate, the tried and true known figure that was the most moderate. I mean, Bernie didn't win. Elizabeth Warren didn't win. And so if he goes on to lose, what Democrats really feel like is a winnable election, then there will be a sense of like, okay, been there, done that. It is finally time to kind of put a Sanders progressive, on the ticket for the next time. I think there will be, I think that, Biden has been very good. Unlike 4 years ago, he's been good at kind of bridging this divide. I mean, there was not unity in the party 4 years ago under Clinton. It was very, very problematic between that Bernie wing and the Clinton wing. Now, it's not that it's perfect this year, but I mean, they have bridged a lot of that. They are more unified, definitely, than they were 4 years ago.
Well, could we say that's because of Biden, or could we say that's because of Trump having 4 years to drive the Democratic?
I think it's both. I think a Trump presidency has united, the left. I think Biden is a different figure than Clinton. He just isn't as polarizing. He does reach across the aisle better. He has been much better at working the Sanders folks. I mean, much better since the primary, bringing those two sides together. And just as a factual matter, Bernie and Joe Biden get along a lot better than he and Clinton ever did. So a lot of factors made this just a better year for unity for Democrats.
It's Week in Review on KUOW. We'll be back in a moment with our guests, State Senator Mona Das, Independent and former Republican Party Chair Chris Vance, and Q13 political commentator C.R. Douglas. And if you'd like to, you can watch us on Facebook.com/KUOW Public Radio or YouTube.com/user/KUOW 94.9. I'm Ross Reynolds. It's Week in Review.
Thanks a bunch to our listeners and members who joined KUOW yesterday in celebrating National Radio Day. We are so glad you're part of the KUOW community. It's never too late to join forces with those who want to make sure this public radio service stays strong in the years to come. You can learn more and be part of this legacy by going to KUOW.org/radio.
Support for KUOW comes from BECU, a member-owned credit union putting people over profit, offering financial services and support to the community with access to local financial centers, over 30,000 ATMs, and online resources at becu.org. Federally insured by NCUA.
94.9 KUOW, Seattle's NPR news station. Sound stories, sound voices. 12:26, and we return to KUOW's Week in Review.
I'm Ross Reynolds, and for Bill Radke, live from downtown Ballard. Our panel this week, Chris Vance, C.R. Douglas, and Mona Das. The Seattle City Council is getting blamed for the resignation of Police Chief Carmen Best. There's a move to recall Councilor Kshama Sawant. Meanwhile, council members are calling for the recall of Mayor Durkan, some of them at least. There's this huge divide. C.R. Douglas, is this the usual hurly-burly of politics, or is this divide between the council and the mayor something deeper?
It's a little bit deeper than normal. Yes, I think that's true. I mean, listen, there's not, most of the time relations between councils and mayors in Seattle aren't that great. This has probably hit a new low, but we've had some pretty low points in the past. I think actually it's going to get better. I think the council, inadvertently, I would say, drove out Carmen Best. I don't think they meant to. I think they were trying to send a signal, but they did not want to kill her in the process, if you will. I think that's been a wake-up call. They realized they went too far. They're going to have to slow down and reel it in, and they're going to have to really start working with the mayor as they go forward and make these difficult decisions. And just one more thing, I think the mayor, she can't just spend a year between now and her reelection campaign bashing the council. She's got to show results on this front. I mean, she has been pushing some big changes to the department, and she needs the council to come together and agree with her on some things so that she has something to show for reform come next fall.
Yeah, and yesterday we had the mayor on. She was talking about working with the city council and responded to a question from a listener named Joe.
My question is, how can we work with the city council and have a little bit more of a collaboration? I just feel like so much of the city is at odds with each other with, it seems like you're pitted against the council, against, former police chief Best. And it just seems like we're doing lots of infighting, and a lot of the kind of the recommendations that are put up seem very polarizing. I'm just wondering, how can we get more to the middle? How can we have some moderation, and how can we be more collaborative as a city?
I do think we're making progress. I think council and I will have some things jointly that we can announce. We're still working through other issues. There are some disagreements on approaches and on policy, but I do believe, Joe, you're exactly right. Our city needs us to pull together and work together even where we disagree. Yes, we should say where we disagree, but then we should find a way forward on that. There's too much at stake here, and there's too many challenges in the city for that not to happen. So while there will continue to be some disagreements, I'm hoping that we can move beyond those to get to a process that is where we actually sit down and bridge those gaps.
The mayor kind of echoing what you just said, CR, about how the council and the mayor will get together. But I got to say, when you throw in the complication of recall efforts going on, to recall Kshama Sawant, to recall the mayor, how do you get over that when you're talking to people who are trying to get you removed from office, CR?
Well, I mean, it's not that easy, but it's not as though, I mean, I don't know that we could say Durkan is leading the recall for Sawant. I think she's kind of, and this council is not leading the recall of Durkan. I mean, there is a recall movement there. I think those are
council members who've called for the recall, are there not?
Well, I think they've called for her resignation, but I haven't heard much of that since they said it once. So I actually I don't know that those recall efforts are going to be more than just kind of a sideshow. I don't think they'll. I mean, there's a standard you have to meet for recall to even make the ballot, and they're kind of fighting over that, whether they're even legitimate. And as it gets pushed and courts hear those, you get to the point where a recall isn't going to be on till next fall's election anyway, when the mayor's on the ballot, et cetera. So I don't know the recalls yet are going to actually amount to something. I still think the pressure for the council and the mayor to come together is being felt on both sides.
Chris Vance, you're not in Seattle, but you're a really close observer of politics, and you know politics well. What do you make of this battle that's going on between the council and the mayor here? Do you think it's going to be resolved?
Whenever I'm asked about Seattle, I always start with saying, look, I don't live in the city of Seattle. I was born there. So I don't want to lecture the people of Seattle how to run their city. But one thing I do think that matters here is just the experience and the craft of knowing how to hold public office. I spent 2 terms in the House of Representatives in Olympia before I got elected to the King County Council. And when I joined the county council, they hand you a gavel, you're chairman of a committee, and you're making big decisions. I could not have done that job if I had not spent time in Olympia being trained on how to be a lawmaker. One of the big weaknesses in Seattle is every one of these council members and the mayor, if I'm not mistaken, it's their first job in elective office. She's never been a mayor before. She's never dealt with a legislative body before. These folks have never been legislators before. And they're just not very good at it. And they keep changing their mind and passing things and then rescinding them and amending things, and just the chaos. You don't see that, for instance, in King County government, where typically King County council members first came from the legislature for some reason. Seattle would really benefit if some of these incumbent state legislators would choose to run for the Seattle City Council. I don't know why they don't. It's a big pay raise, it's a full-time job. But a lot of this are a lot of rookie mistakes.
CR, do you agree that these are rookie mistakes? And also, I'm kind of curious that you've watched the council for a while. It seems as though the council's quite unified and there are not more mainstream interests expressing views as we might have seen from councils in the past. What are your thoughts?
Well, the council certainly turned a lot more progressive and solidly progressive after last election. So in some ways, they're not as divided as they have been in the past. When the moderates were sort of more in charge, or at least it was a little bit equal. It's not equal anymore. I agree with Chris. I mean, it is the first. I mean, I can't remember a city council member who had been elected to something else before. It's almost always the first political, elected job. So it's kind of a starter job, and there is downsides to that because unlike in the legislature, as Chris was saying, you're not a chairman when you're a freshman legislator. Well, you're a freshman council member. Every council member is a chair of a committee. I mean, they have substantive roles. I think we've elected pretty good mayors, even though most of them haven't actually had an elected job beforehand. I think it generally has worked, but I think there have been some rookie mistakes. I think clearly this council went too fast, too quickly, being pressured by the outside on police reform, and they just, things were not vetted. They were taking votes too quickly. Some didn't even realize they were kind of lowering the police chief's salary. I mean, they don't have the central staff they used to because of cutbacks to vet some of these things. Amendments are being added the morning of without any review. I mean, there were a lot of rookie mistakes that have been made recently. Absolutely.
Mona Das, you're an elected official outside of Seattle. You're in the Auburn, Renton area. But I wanted to ask you, I've been seeing that the GOP and perhaps other opponents are pulling up Seattle as the example of what not to be. They're kind of riding Seattle as you don't want to be like Seattle. And I wonder if you see where you are in Auburn and Renton, that Seattle has become a rallying cry for opponents of the progressive agenda.
Well, yeah, thank you. I definitely don't live in Seattle. And I want to say that I know that Seattle politics and what happens in Seattle is, front and center a lot, and the focus is there. But there are so many other places, especially I've been working with my mayors in Kent and Renton the public has spoken. The public has said, we want police reform. And so that is also down in the Kent area as well as Renton. And so working with those mayors on what we can do to reduce police, add more crisis counselors, add more mental health professionals, and not have the police be everything to our communities. And so I think the conversation is heated in Seattle, and it's what I'm seeing when I'm working with my mayors in my cities, that it's much more collegial, and we're really working towards what's best for the community.
But are you hearing people in South County where you are pulling up Seattle as the example of what you don't want to be?
Absolutely. Yeah.
You are really. What kind of things? How would they use?
Well, I mean, people just don't want to make sure that it's not so it's not so completely chaotic, and that everyone is doing what they can for the community. And I think the Seattle City Council people, as we mentioned, really are responding to the outcry of public outrage, which is understandably so. And I trust that they will see through it as they best can for their city in Seattle. But I do think that other jurisdictions are taking it a little slower and a little more methodical, and with the community involvement as a front force of that as well.
This is the Week in Review. We're hearing from State Senator Mona Das, Chris Vance, independent political consultant, former state legislator, former King County council member, and Q13 political commentator C.R. Douglas. When we return, the political legacy of Slade Gorton. It's okay if I go to Gorton.
Week in Review will continue in a minute on 94.9 KUOW, Seattle's NPR news station. Sound stories, sound voices. It's 12:37.
Okay,
we'll bring you an in-depth examination of the NBA bubble this afternoon at 2 o'clock.
But they're all good with vacations.
Support for KUOW comes from Geico, offering auto insurance coverage for cars, trucks, or SUVs, and providing 24/7 customer service. More information on auto insurance at geico.com/Seattle or 1-800-947-AUTO.
70 degrees in Seattle. A chance of showers is with us through tomorrow morning. Then we're looking at a mostly sunny weekend. And now we return to KUOW's Week in Review.
I'm Ross Reynolds, hosting this week. Bill Radke back in a couple of weeks. I'm joined by Chris Vance, former King County Council member, former state legislator, former Republican Party chair, now an independent, and Mona Doss, state senator for the 47th District, and C.R. Douglas, political analyst for Q13. You can watch us, if you dare, live at facebook.com/KUOW Public Radio or at youtube.com/user/KUOW 94.9. We note the passing this week of a giant in Washington state politics. Slade Gorton died at the age of 92. Looking back at the three-time U.S. Senator and State Attorney General's career, we see how it paralleled changes in the Republican Party and U.S. politics. Chris Vance is a former Republican Party chair in Washington state. Can you tell us what you remember about Slade Gorton and his influence on state politics and national politics?
Slade I'm one of hundreds of people in the state who would call him a friend and a mentor. I always considered myself a junior partner in the firm of Gorton and Dunn, who led the Republican Party. He was one of the great elected officials this state has ever produced. He was an incredibly influential and consequential member of the legislature, attorney general who argued in front of the United States Supreme Court, and then not just a U.S. senator, but a great U.S. senator who worked with the Democrats in Congress to get things done for Washington state. And as good a politician as he was a better human being. Slade Gorton flew home every weekend to go see his granddaughters play soccer. He and Sally Gorton were just loved by everyone who ever met them. He seemed, if you didn't know him, kind of cool and aloof and cerebral, but he was just an incredibly good person. And he pretty much was the leader of the Republican Party in this state for a long time. And the party that he built and he led doesn't exist anymore. He probably wouldn't be welcome in today's Washington State Republican Party. It's a real tragedy, and it's a great loss for all of us.
That's interesting. You mentioned that back in a 2019 interview with David Hyde. Slade Gorton compared the political climate during the impeachment of Richard Nixon back in 1974 to the politics around the impeachment of Donald Trump.
I think it was easier to appear across these partisan lines, which have grown so steep in the course of the last several years, that one party automatically takes its position opposite the other. In 1974, we were probably beginning to move in that direction, but there was much more common knowledge, common ways of reaching conclusions than there is today.
How do we recapture that?
I think one issue at a time, almost one person or one group at a time, probably easier to reach across lines at the local level, a little less so at the state level. Very, very difficult in Washington, D.C. But we built this wall around ourselves brick by brick. We're going to have to take it down brick by brick.
Kind of an optimistic view that we can take down the wall brick by brick from a 2019 interview with the late Slade Gorton. CR, your thoughts about the legacy of Slade Gorton? What stands out to you about his long and storied career?
Well, it really was pretty remarkable. I mean, he succeeded at a level and for a length of time like no other Republican in this state in modern memory. I mean, 6 statewide victories, 3 as attorney general, 3 as senator. No one has done that. I mean, we talk about Dan Evans, super popular governor, of course, very accomplished, but Dan only won 4 statewide elections. I mean, 3 as governor and then didn't even serve a full Senate term. So Slade Gorton really checked more boxes than really any other Republican. And that's pretty remarkable. I will say, it's also remarkable given his style. I mean, I interviewed him a number of times, and I wouldn't call him personable. I mean, I hear what Chris is saying, but in some ways he was a very unlikely figure to have succeeded so well. He was very studious. He was very incredibly smart. He wasn't really a stem-winding speaker. He didn't really work a room in a way that most politicians do. And yet he succeeded so well. I mean, his superpower really was his intellect. I mean, he just far surpassed anyone. And though he wasn't a natural campaigner, he was a natural colleague. I mean, when he got into these positions, he worked in the system so brilliantly as attorney general and as a senator. I mean, whether you liked his politics or not, you cannot disagree that he really was an effective player in these systems.
Chris, you talked about how Slade Gorton to many was a warm, personable person, but that was that chilly exterior to him that he kind of radiated. And I understand that sometimes even his aides asked him to kind of loosen up a little bit, be a little bit more friendly in his public facing side. Why do you think he can do that?
Oh, he is who he is. I mean, he couldn't be phony. I always thought it was kind of phony in the 1986 election when they had him wear cardigan sweaters and stuff. I actually hated that. If you were talking to Slade on a personal basis about your kids, about your health, how things are going, he was the nicest guy, the warmest guy. He would always come and ask me about my kids and stuff. But when you shift over to politics and policy, he was the smartest guy in the room, and he made sure you knew that. And there's a story, I don't know if it's apocryphal, I don't know, that people would go to his office and pitch him on something, and he would just like, okay, you're wrong. And then tell them why they're wrong. And they would like leave crushed. And his staff would go, you can't do that and stuff. Well, it's just, he was so smart that it seemed intimidating sometimes. But believe me, on the human level, he and Sally Gorton were 2 of the nicest people you would ever meet.
Can I just say something about that style? Because as an interviewer who had interviewed him a bunch, there was an intimidation to him because of his brilliance. And, there were a lot of times where he'd take a question you asked and, deconstruct it right in front of you and kind of turn it back on you. And you kind of cowered and thought to yourself, boy, wish I hadn't asked that question. I mean, he really was intimidating that way. And that ended up working for him. But it also was a style that did turn people off too.
Yes, as someone who interviewed him, I had the same experience as UCR. He did not rules gladly. But I want to go back to that clip of his where he kind of looked at a future where perhaps we were not as polarized as we are now. He said probably local, statewide, national might be the last to come. And he said we could do that brick by brick. In some ways, that's a very optimistic perspective on where we go from here with our political divide. Mona Das, I'm kind of curious if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, I never met Slade, and his reputation definitely precedes him in our state everywhere. And I do really think something that someone mentioned earlier, I don't know where he would fit in the Republican Party right now, especially in the Senate. There are very few moderates in the Senate, in the state legislature. So it's, I wish I had met him and I wish his family well, but I just wonder where he would fit in right now. You're on mute, Ross.
That's a really good question. Chris and CR, is there anyone who could take that role that he took? A moderating influence. He zigzagged on policy between the 2 parties. He wasn't afraid to oppose what Republican doctrine was. And can anyone do that anymore? I can't imagine someone kind of taking that same role today in the U.S. Senate. How can that happen? You talked about.
Well, it happens all the time.
Yeah.
In Democrats, but right now, and things may change. We can't predict the future that far in advance, but as of right now, a moderate like Slade Gorton could not get elected in Washington state because they'd never make it through the primary. Look what just happened in our primary, where Slade and Dan Evans and Rob McKenna and a lot of the moderate old guard endorsed 2 candidates, Raul Garcia for governor and Mike Vasca for attorney general. And the base sniffed out the fact that these guys were moderates and rejected them overwhelmingly and voted for people who were very Trumpy. Right now, the base of the Republican Party, the only thing they care about is your fealty to Donald Trump. So one thing Slade and I disagreed with near the end of his life was he was much more of an optimist than I was. And he stayed in the party. He was kind of mad at me for leaving the party. Mm-hmm. I think it has changed so much that someone like him would just not be comfortable. And here's the great failing, and I want people to understand this. The reason we were able, I was on the King County Council in the 1990s when the federal government listed the Puget Sound salmon as an endangered species. We needed hundreds of millions of dollars to restore salmon habitat. Not something you think a Republican would care about. I made multiple trips with other folks from King County. Slade Gorton and Norm Dix, working as a bipartisan duo, they got us that money. The reason we restored Puget Sound salmon is Slade Gorton and Norm Dix. And we're just going to miss that kind of leadership.
CR, do you see anything on the horizon that portends the return of leaders who can work both sides of the aisle, particularly coming from the Republican side?
You know, it's super hard for a lot of reasons. You know, the country is self-selected into these bluer enclaves and redder enclaves. You know, I heard Slade Gorton a couple of years ago say when he was in the Senate, the most conservative Democrats were actually more conservative than the most liberal Republicans. I mean, there was this sort of web of overlapping ideologies, and you almost don't have that anymore. I mean, the parties are so siloed with very little crossover. I guess there are sort of two theories going forward about whether Trump is really permanently realigning things or if he's just temporarily shaking things up. So, you know, whether he gets, you know, ousted this November or he serves another 4 years, you know, at some point Trump is going to leave the stage. And, you know, one theory is we will go back to kind of a more normal Democrat Republican, you know, dynamic, if you will, or we won't, and the Republican Party especially is forever changed, so that a guy like Slade Gorton, you know, would really have to find a different party. You know, I guess I kind of think the Trump era will end and there'll be some reversion back to the mean, but you know, obviously we don't know that.
It's a measure of our turbulent times that the U.S. Postal Service is turning into a political issue. The president saying a vote by mail can be rigged. The Postmaster General, Louis DeJoy, announcing he was ordering some mail sorting machines be disabled. He called it an efficiency measure. Democrats called foul, said he was deliberately interfering with the vote by mail. Then the Postmaster General apparently pulled back, saying he would put those changes on hold. But KUOW's John Ryan is reporting that the Postal Service had already shut down 40% of the high-speed letter sorting machines in the Seattle area. I'm curious from the three of you, is too much being made of this? Is there a genuine, real concern here that disrupting the Post Service could turn this election? Do you share those concerns? CR?
Go ahead.
Well, my sense is that this is a little bit overblown. You know, the Postal Service, because of some longstanding problems and then COVID exacerbating them, was in a real budget crisis, you know, because of email. And then in more recent years, just the reduction in first class letters. I mean, that was a cash cow for the Postal Service, and they've just fallen off a cliff. And in COVID, they fell off a cliff. People kind of stopped mailing and marketing brochures, all that kind of stuff. So they were in this crunch. And they've been having to do cost cutting. They've been doing that for several years now. And so, you know, some of this was in play before this, you know, the new postmaster was implemented in July. It was clearly, though, the wrong thing to do optically, certainly in the middle of this, to accelerate it. It does seem like he was accelerating the cost cutting trends, but, you know, Congress is also pushing him, and they have wanted him to be in that service to be self-sustaining. So there's been a dynamic between Congress and the Postal Service that they've never really stepped up and funded it like they probably need to.
Mona Das, we heard CR say perhaps these concerns about the Postal Service are a little overblown. What do you think?
I'm extremely concerned. I think that I'm, in Washington State, obviously we are 100% vote by mail. So we are reliant on the post office. I'm very thankful that we have backups where we have drop boxes throughout our state. I'm very grateful for Attorney General Bob Ferguson for taking the lead on protecting our elections, but I am very concerned. I think it is an attack on democracy. I'm more concerned about other states because we do have some backups in place, and I'm very proud of the work that we've done in the legislature to make sure that our postage is paid, that we have fair voting, that we did the Native American Voting Rights Act and same-day registration, and those types of things are really key to making sure our democracy is strong here in Washington State. And I do worry about other states, and I hope they have time to put other measures in place to make sure that their voting and their voters can have their voices heard.
Chris Vance, you've been around politics for a long time, and we've had vote by mail in Washington State for, I believe, a decade. Have there ever been any problems associated with vote by mail here that would cause concern?
No, especially not since the Dino Rossi case exposed some of the problems and they got fixed. But Ross, vote by mail is not the real issue here. And with all due respect to CR, I don't think people are nearly concerned enough. There's a sense among Americans that it can't happen here. Don't get too worried. Well, I'm telling you, we are living in a Handmaid's Tale prequel right now. Donald Trump will do everything he can get away with to steal this election. He and the people around him have no respect for democracy. They will do everything they can that they can get away with. Last night, he went on national television and said he's going to send law enforcement into the polling places to intimidate people to not vote. They will do everything to steal this election. And you look at what's happening in Belarus right now, where the people are taking their destiny back in the streets of Minsk. That very well may be what American cities look like in a few months, because the Republicans, this generation of Republicans, is no more willing to let go of power than Vladimir Putin or Viktor Orban is. And I'm dead serious about that. We need to be ready for absolutely anything.
Can I just say one thing, Ross?
Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to clarify, when I say I think it's overblown, what I really meant is the conspiracy theories. I think this is a real issue, but I don't know that the narrative that this is some big conspiracy on the part of this new postmaster to rig an election are super clear. I mean, again, there were some longstanding issues. There was some cost cutting that was going on. He accelerated a little bit, but I will say that it is a real issue to disrupt vote by mail, and I don't underplay that. The interesting thing is it's not only bad for democracy if you kind of mess with one of the big infrastructures, which is the mail system, but it's bad politics for Trump. I mean, the fact of the matter is that vote by mail, his big theory is that vote by mail somehow helps Democrats over Republicans. And there are a lot of studies that show that it's at best a wash, and in some cases actually helps Republicans. I mean, there are a lot of Republican Secretary of States and county elections officials that love vote by mail. Vote by mail is going to be actually used more than it ever has been by rural and elderly voters, especially in the age of coronavirus this time. I mean, Trump may be hurting his own chances by attacking the mail system, and if he is trying to disrupt it, because it may actually be a net benefit to him.
Chris, you mentioned earlier we're in a prequel to Handmaid's Tale, the Margaret Atwood novel. I just want to mention I'll be interviewing Margaret Atwood next week about the book she just wrote, which is a sequel to Handmaid's Tale. So listen for that coming up on the record in the not too distant future. I'd like to end on a more positive note, a lot of grim stuff going on, but vacations, or whatever we want to call a vacation in this pandemic era. We've asked each of the three of you to talk about what it is that you're trying to do. Have you gotten out of town? Have you gone anywhere? Is a vacation for you just a walk around your neighborhood? Mona Das, how about you?
Well, I think staycation is the right word to share now. I think lots of public parks, lots of walks in the woods, wearing a mask, of course. And I think what I'm seeing, on my news feeds or from my friends is that, they're all traveling in state. Yellowstone is getting a lot of tourist dollars from friends of mine. And, it's just really, really interesting to watch people wear their masks everywhere and make sure that they're staying safe and healthy. I have a lot of friends that are renting RVs and traveling around the state or around the country too. So it's been a really interesting thing to watch how people are adjusting their lives and not traveling out of the country.
How about you, Mona? Have you gotten out of town?
Well, actually, in the beginning of the pandemic, I was in Chicago with my family. And so it was wonderful to be with my nephews and my family, and just to be with family. It was a scary time for everyone. And so it was just really nice to be together with my family. My mom was there as well. So it worked out really well for me.
Chris Vance, how about you? Have you had anything resembling a vacation this summer?
Oh, just golf on the weekends. But no, we're not going anywhere for a couple of reasons. Number one, a member of our family got COVID and we all had to be tested, and she recovered and she's fine. We all had to be tested and quarantined, and that really got our attention. So we're just not comfortable going anywhere with large groups of people, mask or no mask. So we're just going to stay home this year and look forward to next year when I've got 2 vacations planned and my daughter's wedding. But this year it's just hunker down and stay healthy.
Sweet. How's the golf game? How are you hitting them, Chris?
I am the most consistently awful bogey golfer. I mean, bogey's not bad, but I never get any better. And I've been playing since I was 8 years old. Bogey.
Someday. And how about you, C.R. Douglas? Anything resembling a vacation for you this summer?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't been on a plane since last November, so, going on a year. But I did a couple weeks ago. Our family took a camping trip. That was the farthest I've traveled during COVID. We went over to Leavenworth, 2 siblings, their spouses, 4 nephews, and a niece. And boy, did we have fun. We had a great 3 days of camping. It was perfect, in the age of COVID, because it's very outdoorsy, and we did a lot of fishing and hiking, and it was a super great time. So I recommend camping to anyone who's wondering, what to do when you want to get away, but you're not going on an airplane and want to be, relatively safe in an outdoor situation.
Well, my wife and I might take a short vacation, just jumping on a Washington State ferry and sailing all the way up through the San Juans, and maybe getting off, but maybe just coming back again. If it's a beautiful day, it's nice to be on the water in Puget Sound. Thanks to all of you for joining us. The Week in Review today with Chris Vance, Q13 political commentator C.R. Douglas, and State Senator Mona Das. We really appreciate you taking the time, and you have a great week. Our program produced by Sarah Leibovitz, live stream brought to you by Juan Pablo Chiquiza and Teo Popescu. I'm Ross Reynolds from KUOW. Be kind to each other and have a wonderful weekend.